Hi guys, today we're going to be talking through the top 5 mistakes that podcast hosts make that you should avoid. So if you're about to launch a show for your business or for yourself, here are 5 things to look out for. My name's Alice Violet. I've been working as a podcast producer for about 5 years, primarily with businesses, and I've been working in content marketing and creation for 10 years. So let's get started. The first common mistake that I come across is having a different host for every episode. And this is common in businesses who have loads of different people in their marketing department who want to get involved in the podcast. And so they each take it in turns to host an episode. The issue with this is that it doesn't feel like one series that goes along in order. It doesn't feel like part of a succinct thing that you want to go back and watch all the different episodes. Also, you're going to learn so much as you go. I've done training with businesses before who will say to me, Alice, can you come in and do like one day of filming or 2 days of filming 3 or 4 podcast episodes? And I advise against doing that because you're going to learn so much that you can apply as you get more confident and learn more skills. So if you're doing it all at the beginning and you're releasing it 3 months later, you haven't had that time to grow in confidence and skills and apply that. The next common mistake that I come across is a really long introduction. Definitely avoid this. And I particularly do not recommend having a pre-recorded introduction that you whack on at the beginning of every episode. Most people are just going to be hoping to skip past it. If they're in the car or they're running and they can't, they're just resenting having to keep listening to this same introduction. So I do avoid it. Instead, I would recommend getting straight into the meat of the episode with a quick hello and welcome. This is who I am. This is what you're listening to, so that people can get to the content and the value of the episode. If there is some kind of promotional element that you do want to put in, consider putting that in the middle of the content and just saying, I'm going to interrupt you for 30 seconds to bring you today's sponsor, or I'm going to interrupt you just to tell you a bit about myself. And then you go straight back to the content of the show. Or you can have a space at the end, but I wouldn't recommend having any kind of important announcement once you've stopped recording and the music has come on, because most people are going to turn off. Another common mistake that I come across with hosts is that they're way too formal. And I know that a lot of this comes down to nerves, but you really do want to try and bring your personality to the mic. And that goes back to what we mentioned earlier about growing in confidence, which just means having to practice and do it lots of times. Now, as you can see, I'm sitting in a sofa at the moment, and this is really important. When I was trying to find a location to record the Cyber Made Human podcast, we tried loads of different places, some that had computer chairs, some that had more beautiful but stiff chairs, and it really impacts body language and confidence, especially when you're also filming video with guests that might not be used to talking on mic or in front of a camera. So I really think consider what chair you're in, consider the environment, because that makes a huge difference to guests' confidence. But also remember to bring some personality to the show. Don't feel like you have to be a news presenter. You're not. You can bring your personality, your background to the show. Don't feel like you have to hide it. The next mistake I often see with podcast hosts is that they have a script. Recently, I was speaking to someone who was asking me for some tips before they go on a show, and I was appalled to hear that their business actually did a whole 45-minute recording as a practice run before doing the proper episode. Quite often when I'm sitting and chatting to my guests, I'm saying, stop, save this for the mic, because what they're saying is really interesting and their authentic reactions to stuff are really interesting as well. So I really avoid having a really overly practiced version of the show beforehand, because it will get rid of any kind of personality that might come up. I much prefer to say that other things might come up when we're discussing the topic, questions that we haven't specifically mentioned beforehand might come up, and leave that space for natural flow of conversation. If you work for a company that needs to be really careful about what they're putting out there, I would still encourage you to have that freedom to talk on mic, knowing that you can always cut that section out if you decide not to put it in the show. So my final tip for being a great podcast host is thinking about background noise. This can also be body language. So we've mentioned location. I'm sitting on a nice soft chair here. But if I was making loads of noise, that might be picked up on the mic. And that's especially important if you're doing an in-person recording. So if you're doing it virtually, you can isolate the different audio streams. So if someone sneezes in a different room, I can cut that out. But if my guest sneezes in an in-person podcast, that's picked up on both microphones. So you both need to pause and say that sentence again. Equally, if the rain started lashing at the window, that would be coming through all of the microphones. This again is important if you're doing a virtual podcast or a non-visual podcast where you are sitting in a computer chair, they tend to be very loud, or you're typing and making notes in the background. Do be mindful that this all will be picked up on the mic. Depending on your producer or your editor, they may have the skills to be able to isolate those sounds, but they may not. And sometimes that does come down to the type of microphone that you're using as well. So try and limit the amount of background noise. I remember once I recommended somebody to go on a podcast, and unfortunately they had their washing machine on in the background the whole time. And I was actually editing the show, and I was thinking, it's kind of my responsibility because I recommended this guest. So I had to try and get rid of the background noise of their washing machine. So do be mindful and be aware of what's happening in the background. So those are 5 top mistakes I come across with podcast hosts that hopefully you can avoid without having to learn the hard way. I've also done a video on the top 5 tips on how to improve your podcast hosting skills. So do check that one out and subscribe to our channel because we're doing lots more content like this. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.